Hello, gentle readers, fellow earthlings. Reading Foundations today from Study with Ross Finlayson, this December 12th, 2025, will be the previous installment of Reading Foundations ended with a brief consideration of Raymond Kurzweil's The Singularity is Near. Is it ever not near? These kinds of things. That today they'll just be continuing along with the rest of this kind of cursory survey of this box of books and the ideas that can kind of arise from them. And then, as with regards to the relations to this study, the foundations, and then the applied as well, the pure and the applied of the theory, and why such a course of lifelong learning can be fruitful, and as well that a regular review of materials that over time are influential may help to provide context and to various learners, their levels of introduction to the language and familiarization with the theories and of the language, that then this will be a spoken word sort of account of this kind of thing. These talks are usually about 1 hour, and then the idea is that thusly the video fits within 4 gigabytes, and then that as an audio track, though, it would be remarkably less, while still preserving audio fidelity of these kinds of ideas. So let's take a look and see what's in the box today, and figure out as from this these items what would be something interesting about them to find. I regularly enough watch the YouTube and not so much looking for things as just finding things and looking around and looking at things. And so it gratifies me a bit to see some of the recent talks in the popularization of physics that help to explore some of these crises in physics, and that are well known to practitioners in the field, and some of the ideas that are like accepting and for the admiration of the philosophy and the theory behind the things, and then for the practical and the practicing physicist and these kinds of things. And so, in a sense, that's still kind of all over the place, but it helps go to show that not everybody is just lined up to figure out the next G minus 2 muon bit. While, though, as is explored here, there's all these different kinds of practical aspects of the tetrad of quantities and forces and fields, the elements that are yet for science to truly explain. And then that's part of the larger talk here. And then about mathematics, somebody the other day kind of came up with like, well, we figured out a new large cardinal we want to talk about. It's like, oh yeah, what's that? And it's like, well, it's kind of the same thing with the illivalency and univalency, or the illative and univalency, exacting cardinals. And it's like, well, cardinals aren't sets in the set theory. And large cardinals aren't cardinals either in the set theory. And it's like, you can readily derive a contradiction from adding these things to exist in the theory without otherwise fixing that. So this just goes to show that this is a kind of a contemporarily current account of things. These books are from Biology, Methods in Bioengineering series. Now, I haven't even opened the shrink wrap off this before. So these are also from Artech House. So Artech House is usually more familiar as a publisher of books in the radio frequency engineering and the telecommunications, that's where I'm most familiar with books from Artech House. But here as well these are kind of like industrial, and what would intend to entail things that are in the field is like letters and reviews and this kind of stuff. That these are books in bioengineering. So this is organ preservation and reengineering with regards to transplantation, and this is called cell transplantation. So these 2 volumes from Artech House, with the cell transplantation from Soto Gutierrez, Navarro Alvarez, and Fox, and Organ Preservation and Reengineering from Eugen and Lee, have that this gets into ideas about various organs. This first of its kind volume addresses the important challenge of organ preservation and reengineering, preserving cutting-edge approaches and techniques for normothermic perfusion for damaged livers, hypothermic machine perfusion for the heart, liver, kidney, and pancreas, oxygen persufflation for the heart and liver, imaging to assess the viability of injured kidneys, decellularizing whole organs to create scaffolds for tissue engineering. So this is the usual idea of the scaffolding and being able to grow organs, replacement or transplant organs for those with damaged or diseased organs. These kinds of things. Enhancing hepatocyte recovery from marginal livers. Now, the hepatocyte and the issues of the hepatic or relating to the liver are very much relevant, in particularly to the endemic nature of SARS-CoV-2 and the variety of diseases that are called COVID. Because the strength of SARS-CoV-2 particularly is that it lives in the cholangiocytes, which are bile ducts right at the top of the liver, basically. So most people's notion of the liver, its function, is as with regards to the cholesterols and bile acids cycle, so that the body makes cholesterol and that gets turned into bile acids and that's used to digest food, and then this makes a circle and a cycle of these things. And then also with regards to the corresponding conditions associated with solvents like alcohol in the liver, with regards to cirrhosis and fatty cirrhosis and these kinds of things. And then there's another key component of the liver is its role as after the immune systems and endocrinology, so that it results that the liver's role in endocrinology is that because the blood goes through the liver, then it acts as a means to have that the cellular detritus or otherwise the contents of the blood make for the white blood cells, and then also the markers of inflammation and these kinds of things, and then those associated as with various antibodies, the epitopes of things like viral particles or part of the 32 to 64 kilodalton payload of the SARS-CoV-2 viral capsid, as it were, the crown corona capsid of this kind of thing has that. Then the liver's function is at least threefold in this sense. And so a large part of recovery from diseases affecting the function of the liver is the exercise of these functions. And that the cholangiocytes are particularly where the functional, some of the functional structures, the proteins of this virus dwell and inhabit. And then getting those knocked out is a tough thing to figure out. And so that in these days of the post-pandemic endemic of SARS-CoV-2, and that everybody's got SARS-CoV-2. I mean, even within weeks of January 2020, it was like, yes, 75 to 95% of people in the Bay Area already have it, and it was clearly it's just completely infectious. That and then that Omicron is different. That alpha and beta were real bad, but not MERS, which was getting pretty bad and having gone wild. And then there was that beta was bad enough, but then the Delta was a bunch of different things, and so Delta was perhaps the worst. Although it's hard to say exactly for some of this. So, and then Omicron is a different beast altogether. And so, luckily, there was the epitopes associated with the nasal, post-nasopharyngeal swabs, and the research after Tobacco Mosaic Virus to provide the epitopes and application. And then there was Omicron, which is bad in its own way, but at the same time crowded out otherwise the rest of that. So that then, as a kind of a head-to-toe disease from an entire immune system reaction and the inflammation and the utter confusion in the liver, and so that the direction and the investment of the immune system cells to affect the remission of the disease and the clearance thereas afterwards, that was a very confusing part, because it basically confused the immune system living in the liver. And so some of these ideas of like the perfusion and what is with regards to affecting clearance of the liver and these kinds of things are not so much necessarily reflected in this sort of work, but helps go to show that it's the study of the systems of respiration are that being not just breathing, but the entire kind of account of homeostasis and the activity of life of mammalia after eukaryotes and this whole kind of bit that's definitely been a kind of a universal endemic thing to everybody. So that's something that's kind of worked out in its own way. Then this stem cell bit, cell transplantation, has that the theory of molecular biology has a central dogma called the central dogma of molecular biology. And this is that cells have DNA, and then cells replicate and reproduce and make more cells. And then they have that various progenitors of these lines of cells are called the stem cells. So the stem cells are as of the totipotent, toti meaning all, totally totipotent. They could differentiate, form any kind of cell. And then the multipotent and pluripotent reflect different ways that after a cell begins to differentiate according to structure, and not just the central dogma of molecular biology being that it's the DNA, but also that it's the environmental factors, so the surrounding tissues and hormones and proteins and conditions and the electromagnetic and otherwise that with regards to the conditions for the differentiation of cellular matter in this manner, has that those are then very having much potential with regards to the notions of treatments and applications. And then as with regards to what that means with regards to engineering and bioengineering, and as with regards to that affecting health and life. So that's a serious thing. So what this says is, it says this unique volume covers in detail the basic techniques and protocols of regenerative medicine, focusing on methods for cell transplantation. So cell transplantation may involve things like the mitochondria, as the eukaryotes, the organelles within the cells, but also as regards to other notions of structures like Golgi apparatus, or a lot of different things with regards to providing RNA and DNA to cells as vis-a-vis the lysosome and things that cross the cell wall, then and the intracellular matrices of these with regards to lipids and the structure of the cells, according to the theory and according to biology and molecular biology. Then has that there's a lot going on with like, well, how do stem cells differentiate? And it's known that it's according to the DNA, but it's like, well, the DNA has got everything in it. That's kind of like only a tiny percentage of the DNA's contents are actively promoted, or as according to the notion of the proteome, as after the genome, the genetic and cellular machinery, the gene machine, that makes for what environmental factors would make for the differentiation of stem cells and the organization as with regards to the processes of metabolism and respiration, that these are just the usual kinds of things that would be expected to be already kind of known before these kinds of books are read. Free subscription to the Artech Direct email newsletter. This book is printed about 20 years ago, I imagine. 2011, so 15 years ago. This is very new. Describes various assays and analyses, sources, application notes, tissue engineering using a temperature-responsive cell culture dish. Temperature and pH, of course, both being very significant with regards to the hydrophilic and hydrophobic and the entire notions of the proteins and their folding, the formation, from the very fundamental level to the macro level of the things. Experimental design. In vivo, functional assessment of engineered human insulin-producing cells. So the difference between in vivo and in vitro is the idea is that in vivo means in life, like on live subjects, whereas in vitro means like in the test tube, basically, is what that means. Generation of hyperglycemic immunodeficient recipient mice. So this is with regards to the most common subject of study in many of these settings in the laboratory is with regards to the mouse. The lab mouse, and it's one of when you think of roles that various species play with regards to each other, like pets or livestock, or lab animals, and humans as kind of their curation and role in these things. Has that the lab mouse then is you can generate basically knockout mice, because knockout mice basically says for any given gene that's usually given in a standard lab rat of these many various lines and kinds of these, they're basically clones of each other otherwise, with the identical sorts of ability to be considered as controls in a laboratory experimental setting. That the knockout genes makes for that there's a methodology to make a batch of rats that are missing given genes. And so that then, according to that, then these various controls for can establish for processes of metabolism and respiration, and at the level of organs and of the organism itself, to have it so that's just the usual kind of account of in vivo the study of these things. There are many ethics and laws associated with experimentation on humans and as well lab animals. Man as mouse is sometimes as it's put, but also not so. Generation of insulin producing cells in vitro. So the notion of the insulin is an example of something that after matters of disease and degenerative conditions is one of those things that kind of, as a matter of the body's trying to save itself from other conditions, then after inflammation, then there's things like imbalances and cancers. And so then the idea, and there's also like fibrosis, which is what everybody had to go through, like when their heart got COVID, and then the body had to like extract that back out. The fibrosis is like, well, that's a terrible destructive symptom. It's associated with disease and failure. But at the same time, it's like, and the body has a mechanism that results the defibrosis. And so these are lesser known parts of the physiology that are yet is so in effect. So one of the things that came out of the COVID research is like, hey, remember when it was used to say that your brain doesn't grow? And so then neuroplasticity ends after adolescence or something like that. And that the neuro-generative wasn't so much a thing. It's like, well, yeah, I've heard of that. And like, well, 20 to 25 years ago, they found that that's not so, that some conditions are conducive to the neurogenerative, even after the usual age of plasticity of the brain. So the idea then of this about the heart was like, well, remember they said that the heart can't heal? It just results in scar tissue, and it's like, well, yeah, I heard of that. And it's like, well, what they found out was the heart can heal. And so the idea is that this sort of association with that is like, well, then that adds a whole new thing. Kind of like when the central dogma of molecular biology was just like, it's factors, it's all programmed in the DNA. And then it's like, we'll add in all the environmental factors. So these notions of respiration and metabolism and inflammation and symptoms of disease or syndromes, those also now have all these other things in play to explain why so many people who are at most 6 feet apart are not 6 feet deep. So that's a usual nice account of the association of all these things about this. So the insulin is that people with there's different kinds of diabetes, and it can mostly be associated with atherosclerotic plaques and circulation, because the lymphatic system is so important in the effectiveness of clearance of breakdowns and waste and toxins in the body, that that just gets into different notions of these regions of the organs. And I'm not a medical doctor. I don't play one on TV. But these are matters of health that, since the theory of humors have that the theory of tumors is kind of so associated with it, then has that that's considered to be very great importance to this kind of approach, because millions of people suffer chronic health problems from these kinds of conditions, and so the idea that there could be a cure is considered to be of great possible relevance. Technologies to improve human islet transplantation. So the islets, about the pancreas. The pancreas is kind of like that soupy bit, in the underneath the gastrointestinal. And it's like, well, what is that? What does that have a function? It's like, remember when they said the appendix doesn't have function, and even the name appendix just kind of means leftover and not necessarily needed. It's like, well, yeah. It's like, well, it does have a function, and so it's important. The days when it was like, well, the first thing you do when you get sick is and your adenoids and tonsils get inflamed, is like, well, how about we just surgically remove them? It's like, well, now that's still a thing, but it's also something to be figured out, because sometimes that would result. It's like, well, that would be a chronic injury, and it's like to leave it in. And so the idea of that, and everything from, like, molars and wisdom teeth to growths or the properties of the processes of respiration and the physiology, have that this is an account of medicine as an approach to the understanding and the curation and of toward health. That's the idea. So the pancreas is very important in these kinds of things. Liver repopulation, myoblast transplantation, culture protocols for producing definitive endoderm and pancreatic lineage cells from human ES or iPS cells. So the mesenchymal, and that being very protogenic in a sense. The genetic engineering is an old study. And besides, as in breeding and selective breeding and that kind of stuff, and also with regards to the study of genetic machinery, Crick and Watson, or all that kind of bit, and that the things that affect mutation or as affect RNA and the application of various carcinogens, as they're often called, or mutanogens. Those are considered very dangerous, and particularly as from the viral and virial, they can take a life of their own in a sense. So it's very powerful, the consideration of what could be the potentials of this sort of setting. Then the organs is like growing some organs. Myocardial, with regards to the heart and the membrane of the heart. CAMP, fatty livers, Up to 30% of all livers for organ transplantation exhibit steatotic transformations. So this is kind of like scar tissue. Although functional in the donor, these livers often suffer from a particular susceptibility to ischemia and reperfusion injury. The reduced viability of steatotic livers after cold preservation was found associated with severe deterioration of mitochondrial functions and energy metabolism, which is shown to be particularly alleviate VSOP, which is shown to particularly alleviate mitochondrial alterations in fatty livers, may represent a useful tool for the safe and improved preservation of ischemia-sensitive steatotic livers. So that's with regards to venous systemic oxygen persuflation, VSOP. Is an easy and powerful adjunct for improved preservation of donor organs, seems to be particularly suitable in liver transplantation. The liver is one of the organs that can kind of grow back too, so it's not necessarily, or from what I've heard, I haven't really carried this out, the idea is that even a partial liver transplant can be successful. Oh, this is much like there was Noakes, the theory of light. This is examples in applied mathematics. So this is R.O. Street. It's another form of this Methuen's library here. So that's English. Professor of Mathematics in the Royal Technical College, Glasgow. Methuen and Co. Limited, London. So this is in applied mathematics. It's for mathematicians from 1929. Lagrange's equations and small oscillations, so the perturbative hypothesis and the virial theorems. Lagrange's equation, small oscillations. Motion of a rigid body in 3 dimensions, bending moments and shearing stress. So that gets into, for example, there's the viscoelastic, and all things to do with that. It's like it's staying, and then there's bending and moments is like, well, it's either side is being deflected, and then there's flow is like, well, it's not staying, it's flowing. And so these kinds of things, forces in 3 dimensions, hydrostatics. Now hydrostatics gets involved that there's like the near field and the far field. So there's the hydrostatics is like this whole hill is pressing with the force of the contents of water according to pressure. That's its usual study. And then, but it's somewhat differentiated from like a drop of water or like a creek or something like that. The dynamics and the statics. Electricity and magnetism, attractions, elasticity. And so this is mechanics and up to elasticity. So from 1929, this book discusses, these are the major things to get figured out. Many problems, motions of particles in a straight line. Here that's considered in moment in motion about like the unlinear and the entire account of mechanics. And any smallest change is nominally non-zero, infinitely many higher orders of acceleration. Vis-a-vis, mv and mv squared and 1/2 mv squared and this kind of thing. Inertia, usually the setting of the weight of something, but momentum, and then for heft, that's about mechanics. The kinetic here, and there was the severe abstraction of mechanical reduction. So what results Lagrange, and that's discussed quite thoroughly in Moment in Motion, and a bit in Logos 2000, but most thoroughly there. And then the mechanics, then the severe abstraction to the mechanical reduction became the severe abstraction to the electrical reduction, the electron, and then that's part of statistical mechanics, the thermodynamics, the second law, not to be confused with the first law of thermodynamics, about the dynamics. And then the idea that it's like, well, our standard model is going to result from electron physics is like, well, yes and no. Yes and no. And both, A rhombus, a square plate. A rhombus, ABCD. A circular tube of mass M and radius A rests on a table. It contains two small particles, each of mass M, at the end of a diameter AB. Tube is set in motion along the table by a normal blow P at right angles to AB. Prove that the motion of each particle relative to the tube is given by P squared equals quantity M times this quantity M plus 2 little m sine squared theta, that quantity times a squared theta prime squared. That'd be indicating, oscillatory motion and regular periodic motion. And so then the sine squared term there, pretty much. So, and this is about Lagrange's equations. These are the exercises, and these are examples. These are all examples in an applied radius. So all of these are just problems. It doesn't give definitions or. It does give definitions. It introduces the language, and so everything would have to be defined. But it's mostly this is a problem book without answers given. See what it says. If perhaps the introduction will say, in order to shorten as much as possible the wording of the questions, the following assumptions have been made throughout. And unless the contrary is stated or obviously implied, the questions are to be interpreted accordingly. A string or a thread is fine and inelastic, perfectly flexible and without weight. A table or a floor has a horizontal surface. A rod or a bar is a cylindrical body of negligible cross-section. A cylinder is a right circular solid cylinder. A cone is a right circular solid cone. All bodies are homogeneous and inelastic, and all surfaces, pegs, pivots, pulleys, etc. are smooth. A rough surface, except in questions on limiting equilibrium, is soon to be rough enough to prevent slipping at any time. The following notation is also assumed. Large or small m, the mass, large or small w, the weight, large or small v, the speed, mu, the coefficient, lambda, the angle of limiting friction, k, the radius of gyration of a body about an axis through its mass center normal to the plane of motion. So that gets into the real and virtual, and this is kind of as reduced as it gets for then all these different problems in mostly plane mechanics. It'd be interesting to find if somewhere there's a solution to all of Street's examples in applied mathematics. Oh, this is a book on the ninja, then. A little bit different subject. The spiritual practices of the ninja. So this is talked about here, the Godai, and these kinds of things. So then this is, as one might imagine, wouldn't really know that this is something that would be of something along the lines of the technical and the acknowledgments about, for example, Bushido, clarity, clear mind. See what it says about the Campo Medio, 163. Just as the Kamidama is a shrine and not a shelf, the mesa is an altar rather than a table. On it are arranged artists, natural and common objects such as shells, rocks, flowers, swords, torches, statues, dolls, etc., all of which have a sacred or symbolic content. The way these objects are arranged is significant as they represent the forces of nature in the cosmos. When a maestro of the mesa moves any of these items, he influences nature himself. So this is kind of a matter of kind of like the fetish or the zoomorphism, the anthropomorphism. Here, kind of the itemization or the idolatry of these things in a sense, which on the one hand can be like for the what's the word? Not the effective magic. Affectionate with regards to that. The ideas of things that like reflects on like, and even with regards otherwise to anything but just the mental imagery and picturing that thereof. Has that it's that's not so much. And so the author says this is regarded as spiritual work, but there's a psychological or strategic aspect to it as well. Sympathetic this way. which is that it gives the client an action plan for the future, enabling her to conserve her energies against fatigue by focusing on those things she really needs to do to achieve her goals and avoid the things that distract her. So this is the idea of this practitioner is looking to counsel somebody, to offer them counsel. All right, on to this next little bit. This is Satellite Projects Handbook, Weather Satellites and Beyond. So according to that, there's basically C-band, Ka-band, Ku-band. These being the most common wavelengths of the radio frequency transmissions from Earth to orbit of these times. Then what this book has is descriptions of these projects that have it so that by getting some dishes which help to focus the direction of the energy, and then some transducers, say, or otherwise the antennas converting the energy from a radio wave form to an electrical wave form, then it's possible to communicate with satellites, either observing what they're sending or to send stuff to them. And so this book explains kind of the basics and the details and the specifications that go into this kind of idea, and about the data format and the protocols about these things. Like, for example, it says with UK5, UK6, and IRAS. So this is basically of kind of the Euro set, but it does discuss a lot of these different satellites. Weather satellites, NOAA GOES, polar orbiting satellites, the American NOAAs, sun synchronous orbits, advanced very high resolution radiometer, the AVHRR. So a lot of these are still on station, and a lot of these are obsolete. Automatic picture transmission, support from EU METSAT, EU METSAT's plans, convergence of NOAA and DMSP programs, weather and resource satellite systems, Commonwealth of Independent States, Feng Yun, the Chinese connection. So this is from 1996, and so quite a bit has changed since then. Geostationary weather satellites, Meteostat, GOES, GMS, GOMS, and Feng Yun. The start of the ground station, UOSat-2, and about building a ground station, weather satellite equipment, data, decoding the image, projects, late-breaking news from NOAA, GOES, GMS, and GOMS, some manufacturers and sources, the Keplerian elements, deriving Kepler elements, and some product reviews. So when I looked at this before, is basically the idea is that, to get some dishes, and then everything kind of is compatible with that. A.C. Ewing's The Fundamental Questions of Philosophy, a handbook to the questions posed and the answers given by philosophers in all ages. What is truth, matter, mind, the a priori, the empirical, space, time, cause, freedom, God? So the fundamental question of metaphysics here is, like, as Leibniz says so, and so on, is why is there something rather than nothing? And so then that gets into the being and nothing. Here it's referred to as Hegelian, and kind of a true idealist Hegelian, and these kinds of accounts. So Ewing says something like this. If in view of the argument I've mentioned we assert the world to be finite in space and to have a beginning in time, we have to face either one of two objections according to whether we make space and pastime themselves infinite or finite. If we make them infinite, then we must suppose an empty time before the world began and empty space all around the world. This would commit us to the absolute theory of space and time, according to which they have a being by themselves apart from the things in space and the events in time, and it may be doubted whether this is tolerable. Space apart from extended things in time with no change in it seem empty concepts, really meaningless. If, on the other hand, we deny the infinity not only of matter and space and events in time, but of space and past time themselves, we are faced with the difficulty that we can hardly think of them as finite without thinking them as having a boundary. But to think of them as having a boundary is to think more space and time beyond the boundary. Modern physicists indeed speak of space as finite but unbounded. However, this is a very difficult conception and involves the highly problematic idea of a fourth dimension to which three-dimensional space is related as the two-dimensional surface of a sphere as is to space as a whole. Further, in any case, it still leaves unsolved the problem of time, to which it is not applied. Though the conception may be of value if taken as meaning that the mathematics of the physical world bears certain analogies to that of surfaces of three-dimensional objects, I have no wish to deny. There is also an antinomy regarding divisibility. Every part of space must be conceived as itself divisible into further spaces, and this seems to imply that every piece of matter must be similarly divisible ad infinitum. Now, it is very hard to think of an infinite number of pieces of matter or parts of space as constituting together a finite volume. Further, the complex seems logically to presuppose the simple. Yet this infinite divisibility excludes the possibility of any simple parts of matter. Electrons may be physically indivisible, but they are not logically so. Whatever size they are said to be, we can always conceive parts of them smaller than the whole, although it may be impossible for physical reasons to split them. There is a similar antinomy as regards the divisibility of time and events in time, although Kant, curiously enough, does not use this antinomy. So Kant's got his sublime, and Kant addresses being, but not so much time. And then for being and nothing and time, and for chance. And so then the idea of the divisibility gets into continuum mechanics and mathematics' role in that definition. And the notion of the space is infinite about Big Bang or steady state hypotheses is like, well, both of those are scientifically unfalsifiable. And as well that either of them can be used to tune it up to reflect these things as far as the visible universe goes. And so it is, though, that Ewing is, I find nothing at all disagreeable in this is what he's described there at all. And furthermore, that's a thorough account, and that he could take anybody who kind of disagreed with them and show them logically inconsistent. Where difficulties about infinity are easiest solved is in the case of future time. The difficulties of infinity in a model of a cosmology. And here is like that time goes back forever, space goes on forever, or the way that space goes on forever, and that the idea that time is just reversed from that is like, we'll take the three space dimensions that make like the cross, the three-dimensional crossing, and then consider that as just like a tripod or legs, and then time is just the other way from that. So that time is constantly unfolding and just kind of, according to like the fates and the notion of Lachesis and the fates, the old idea of fate being a thread in time and of time, and all the fabric of all this stuff. Then the space is outward as the fabric, and then the time is as of its raveling and unraveling. The notion then that as one linear continuum, it could be that it's just kind of tense itself up to have three dimensions of space and one ray of time, and then that author like Ewing here. Ewing, A.C. Ewing, who from just his brief reading is a very deep thinker, would result that then that could be, according to mathematics, a pretty direct thing. Alfred Cyril Ewing, a distinguished member of the British Academy, was a lecturer in moral science at Cambridge University from 1931 to 1954, when he was named Reader in Philosophy. Among his numerous works are the definition of good, the individual, the state and world government, and the morality of punishment. The common denominators of all philosophy. So this would go well with something like McKeon's Aristotle over here, about the logic in the things as well. The common denominators of all philosophy. This compact volume explains the basic premises, methods, and language on which the entire edifice of philosophy is built. Philosophers of every age have all tried to answer the same set of fundamental questions, or at least one, the fundamental question of metaphysics. What is the ultimate nature of the universe? What is man's place in the cosmic scheme? Is there a God? And if so, what is his will? How should men conduct himself? what are time and space, matter and mind, truth and freedom? Taking up each of these questions in turn, Professor Ewing summarizes the positions developed by every important philosopher and school of ancient and modern thought, sets these positions and schools in historical perspective, and relates them to today's technology-oriented world, indexed for easy reference. The fundamental questions of philosophy introduces the new philosophy reader to the basic elements of an entire discipline, and provides him with the tools necessary for pursuing more specialized and advanced study. So, yeah, Alfred Cyril Ewing's book here is pretty great. It's from Collier Books. This is a paperback edition, published in New York by A.C. Ewing, M.A. DPhil, Oxon, M.A. Lit D. Cantab, Fellow of the British Academy, Lecturer in Moral Science in the University of Cambridge, which is all right. Third printing, 1968. So here's what he says. Preface. There are two classes of readers for whom this book is specially intended. First, university students who have just begun the study of philosophy, and secondly, those who, without having had the advantage of being at a university, wish to acquire by private reading some idea of what philosophy is and of the great topics with which it deals. I have tried very hard to make the book clear for both these classes, but it is best to realize at the start that it is not possible for a man to enter on the study of philosophy without real hard mental work, however much is done to make his task easier. Many philosophers whose ranks I hoped I have not joined have been and are very much to blame for making the subject unnecessarily obscure by their manner of presentation, but the nature of this subject matter is such as to forbid the sort of effortless understanding we may have of a novel. Professor Dorothy Emmett and Mr. G.E. Hughes have kindly helped me by reading the last chapter and making valuable criticisms. My indirect debts to those whose books I have read on philosophy or who have had verbal discussions with me in the past are naturally, in the case of a book of this kind, too numerous to recount. So he talks about the a priori and the empirical, and let's see here what philosophy is and why it is worth studying. The a priori and the empirical, truth, matter, mind, relation of matter and mind, space and time, cause, freedom, monism versus pluralism, universals, God, bibliography, index. So here we might put cause first, and then truth is with regards to that. Matter and mind is kind of either way with regards to themselves, and then space and time was with regards to mathematics, because it doesn't really just mention mathematics here, but it has universals, and so that'd be his other ideals. Monism versus pluralism here is that it's considered there's like a dual monism, so it's monism, yet it's a monism about dualism. Vis-a-vis the pluralism is just separate accounts. Whether or not they're interrelatable and intersubjective and interobjective, the idea is that there is one at all, is the idea. Monism versus pluralism, universals. One thing when comparing and contrasting two things is to know that the word compare means like how they're alike, and contrast means how they differ. And then versus is like putting two things contra each other, making a contradistinction about them, or a juxtaposition, as with regards to whether they're both framing things in terms of each other or not. And then the vis-a-vis is kind of like force a force. So versus and vis-a-vis are kind of like compare and contrast. So when you say compare, it's kind of naturally implied to the contrast. Or rather, when you say versus, it naturally implies the contrast. When you say compare, it kind of naturally implies the vis-a-vis. But it's always vis-a-vis, those French words, and that usual phrase that's in common usage in English, vis-a-vis versus. And then versus just written is like V. It's got an abbreviation. It just means, two different things. And it usually is, because it's left to right, it's often, it's like the first versus the second part, the parties. That's usual legal name for a case. But then the idea of the concepts is like left and right is like, maybe it should be right versus left, vis-a-vis left versus right, because then which one's first or which one's second is kind of a matter of left or right. And then it gets in all the things like left and right in philosophy and politics, which was a course in a university setting. Who was that? Professor Cause put that out, who later sat on the Mars Life program a long time ago. The issue between determinism and indeterminism is one of the issues between the type of view which is called monistic and the type which is called pluralistic in philosophy. No precise definition of these terms is possible. I disagree. The difference between the two kinds of view being a matter of degree. But we may say that a monist is a person who emphasizes the element of unity in the universe more, a pluralist one who emphasizes more the element of plurality. Undoubtedly, if indeterminism is true, the world is less of a unity than if everything is rigidly determined so that nothing can be different without other things being so. In general, since the monist will tend to emphasize the whole at the expense of the individual, I don't. The element of order at the expense of the element of spontaneity, they don't need to disagree. And the pluralist will tend to lay the emphasis in the reverse direction, correspondingly. The latter is on the whole more likely than the former to do justice to human freedom. And so that's why here it's given an account as why there can be a monism and freedom both. That's given a kind of a first-class treatment in these talks here. We cannot assume that because a person is pluralistic in general in his philosophical outlook, he will necessarily be an indeterminist, or that because he is monistic on the whole, he will necessarily be a determinist. But there's certainly a general tendency in this direction. Only there are all sorts of degrees of monism and pluralism. The extremist kind of monism asserts that everything is just one, and there is nothing more to be said about it. In that case, everything practically that we experience would have to be a sort of illusion, because everything is certainly not just one, as it appears to us. So this can remind of the conversation of Zeno and Aristotle about Socrates and these kinds of things, and Platonism. Less extreme forms assert that everything is one substance, though with different attributes. Spinoza, or a single experience, absolute idealism, or one logical system, the coherence theory. So the coherence theory, with regards to coherence, correspondence, and pragmatist theories of truth, have that those kind of get farther and farther away from the idea of absolute truth. But they're like not disproven by science, because then those or agreement, and so then those just kind of get further into the subjective territory. So to have like a real theory of foundations, it's like it's got to tick all the boxes. It's like, yeah, it's got to tick all the boxes and untick them. They are boxes with ticks. So then when people are identifying indicators of things, so or not so, check yes, check no, it's like this. The pluralist maintains that the cosmos is made up of a number of disconnected entities, not necessarily bound up with each other, but they still in the whole sum of potentials influence each other, so that they could quite well exist apart. They may or may not be subject to other influences much more germane. Theism, as ordinarily believed, may be regarded as a form of monism, since it admits that the world is created and controlled by a single all-powerful mind. Monotheism, there are other kinds. But it stops short of more thoroughgoing forms of monism in that it gives human minds a kind of relative independence, holding them not to be included in, though created by and dependent on the divine mind. And so this, he says, Ewing says, the view according to which God actually includes in himself and does not merely create everything there is commonly known as pantheism. I don't know about that, because that's just an aspect of whether there exists intercession, and that could be a reflection on oneself. So it needn't be a pantheism. It could still be a monism and a monotheism. That pantheism was ... unorthodox, say. Here is to include the Christian and of the Orthodox and the Romans. The other day, the Roman Catholic Church and the Greek Orthodox Church kind of got together after like 1,700 years and broke bread together and prayed together, and it's like, well, that's great, I mean, it's just kind of monumental. It's kind of a historical thing. It helps remind that some of these wheels have been turning, for thousands and thousands of years, and life goes on. The world keeps turning and all this kind of stuff. This is a thoroughly technical account, And so the notions of the introduction of the supreme and the omni, as with regards to otherwise the universal and the total, are left out, that that's supernatural. And it's super and it's natural. It talks about materialism. To turn to the opposite extreme, the term materialism may be understood in many different ways. One, if it means that nothing exists but matter and material properties, then it involves behaviorism and is obviously false. Two, towards the end of the 19th century, it was generally used for the view also called epiphenomenalism, according to which mental events are caused entirely by bodily and have themselves no share in causing either bodily or even other mental events. Three, it is often used simply for the view that mental attributes are attributes of the body, not of a separate substance, which need not entail behaviorism or epiphenomenalism. Four, it is also used to mean simply that mind originated from matter. Five, is used by Berkeley, and by Berkeley almost alone. It stands for realism, the view that matter exists independently of being perceived or experienced. Like the plain man, I am a materialist in the fifth sense. Materialism in the other four senses I've already criticized. So Ewing has a realist account, and that's appreciated here, because everybody at least has at least some kind of material account. And then it addresses that communism, calling itself dialectical materialism, is not very realist, and it's not very dialectical. It talks about change. So yeah, dialectical materialism has some baggage. So yeah, this book by Ewing is considered a pretty great account of a realist with familiarity with the otherwise usual accounts of this time, the mid-20th century. Refers to thinkers like Descartes and Locke and Leibniz, Aristotle, Aquinas. So yeah, questions of philosophy. It's like, well, what is anything true at all? It's like, it's kind of philosophy. A few minutes left then. Let's see if there's what this next book is. Mathematics, the Loss of Certainty, with Morris Klein. Morris Klein has written this book called Mathematics, the Loss of Certainty. Omni, now Omni magazine was a magazine of of interest in like popular science or these kinds of things in the 80s or some time ago. A thinker who understands numbers better than anyone since Euclid delivers a ringing indictment of modern mathematics. So I don't know about that because I have one. So we'll see what it says. Morris Klein, Professor Emeritus of Mathematics, Courant Institute of Mathematical Sciences, New York University. Published by the Oxford University Press, 1980. 1982. Klein, K-L-I-N-E in this case, Klein. The genesis of mathematical truths, the flowering of mathematical truths, the mathematization of science, the first debacle, the withering of truth, the logical development of a logical subject, the logical development of the morass of analysis, the logical development of the predicament circa 1800, the logical development at the gates of paradise, paradise barred, a new crisis of reason, logicism versus intuitionism, the formalist and set theoretic foundations, disasters, the isolation of mathematics, wither mathematics, the authority of nature. So these are the chapter titles here. And I'll be interested in the isolation of mathematics because I'm going to see if I can relate it to what Russell says about the isolation and significance of mathematics. Because then I'm kind of familiar with these things and about talking about them and speaking to them. These kinds of things. And then he introduces at least, the intuitionism and this kind of come around. Talking about Riemann, non-Euclidean geometry, Évariste Galois, Lagrange, and Paolo Ruffini. So these are matters of analysts, but of the finite sort. John von Neumann was sufficiently alarmed to issue a warning. In the often quoted but little heeded essay, The Mathematician, 1947, He stated, as a mathematical discipline travels far from its empirical source, or still more, if it is a second, third generation only indirectly inspired from reality, it is beset with very grave dangers. So here it's like being part of realism. Realism is also, it's very geometrical account. So the isolation of mathematics is this chapter. And so he's talking about the abstraction and the detachment of from the Pythagorean about the Cantorian, and then here that there's a great account of putting those back together again. So this would be where kind of to pick up next time, maybe, because this is actually a pretty thorough account, and we have a lot going on. So I'm really glad we picked up a copy of Ewing's philosophy and then Klein's mathematics, as this is great criticism and an important critical account. Good day, gentle readers. Happy holidays, season's greetings. Until next time.